He was found with his ears bleeding, both eardrums ruptured, his mouth sealed shut, not sewn but burned with wax. In his hands, clutched tight against his chest, was a scroll. Not ancient, but not new either. It wasn't what was written on the scroll that disturbed the investigator. It was the expression on the monk's face. He wasn't in pain. He was smiling. In the spring of 1904, in a forgotten monastery, deep in the Romanian countryside, a monk named Father Alin Dumitru was discovered dead in his private chambers. His room was locked from the inside. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, and no medical explanation for what had happened to his body. What investigators did find, however, was a scroll made of thick, blackened vellum. On it, a language that no one could read, hundreds of symbols arranged in delicate, spiraling formations, some of which appeared to shift when viewed from different angles. The ink was not quite black, more like a deep crimson that shimmered slightly under candlelight. The monastery's abbot contacted the local authorities, who sent a copy of the scroll to the Vatican's secret archives. Within days, the site was closed to outsiders. The other monks were relocated, and the scroll disappeared. For decades, it was believed that the document was either a hoax or simply a forgotten piece of undeciphered text, like the Voynich manuscript or Rongo Rongo of Easter Island. But something about this scroll was different. It didn't just defy translation, it resisted it. In 1947, a Vatican linguist named Cesare Bellini was granted limited access to the artifact under the project name Codex Tenebris, Latin for Book of Darkness, according to his private journals, which were only recently declassified. Bellini made it only 38 days into the translation attempt before something changed in him. His notes became erratic, switching between languages mid-sentence: Latin, Greek, Romanian. Then, a language no one recognized. He began scribbling symbols onto the walls of his quarters. He stopped speaking. He refused food. On the 39th night, he was found in the exact same position as Father Dumitru. Ear canals ruptured, mouth sealed with wax, smiling. The Vatican closed the case, destroyed all physical records of the experiment, and reassigned the project to a division known only as SIN, Sanctum Inquisitio Nocturna, the Night Inquisition. So what was it? What could possibly be written in a language so dangerous it causes death by comprehension? Over the decades, rumors grew. Some said it was an ancient demon tongue created before the Tower of Babel. Others claimed it was a linguistic virus, something so cognitively disruptive that the brain simply collapses when exposed to the patterns of the text. But the strangest theory of all came from a dying theologian named Jacob Stretton in 1971. He wrote in his final book, "Language is not a tool, it is a gate, and some gates were never meant to be opened by the living." Stretton believed the scroll wasn't written by a man, not entirely. He pointed to obscure references in apocryphal texts that mention the mourner's tongue, a language used to bury spirits, not just to describe death, but to trap it. And that's where things get darker. Because after Bellini's death, the Vatican moved the scroll out of Europe completely. According to an anonymous source, it was stored in a deep vault beneath the Nevada desert, in a joint project with the US government. Why would a religious text be held under military control? The answer might lie in the 1987 transcript of a declassified MK Ultra sub-project titled Phonetic Interference Testing. It describes an experiment in which participants were exposed to nonverbal audio patterns, believed to originate from an unknown symbolic system. Subjects experienced hallucinations, nightmares. One suffered a fatal aneurysm. The audio had been filtered from a single vocal recording, allegedly captured from a corrupted wax cylinder found alongside a scroll. So now the question isn't, what is this language? The question is, why is it still being studied? In 2025, a user named Ghost Format uploaded a short, distorted audio file to an obscure forum on the dark web. The title was Codex Tenebris Test.wav. The user vanished 24 hours later. But the file? It's still out there. If what they say is true, then simply understanding the language is enough. Enough to kill. Enough to invite something in. And yet, here we are, talking about it, reading it, translating it, piece by piece. And next time, I'll tell you about the people who didn't survive the first sentence. The first confirmed death was in 1904, but it wouldn't be the last. For more than a century, a quiet thread of unexplained fatalities has followed those who came too close to decoding the language now referred to as Codex Tenebris. A pattern that stretches across decades, continents, and institutions. Some died in silence, others in public, and all of them left behind fragments, notes, drawings, and final words that hinted at the same thing. They saw something, not with their eyes, but in their minds. In 1938, a linguist named Dr. Emil Hartmann was commissioned by a Berlin university to investigate a fragment of the scrolls smuggled out of Romania. He was well respected in the field of comparative languages and had translated multiple early Semitic dialects. According to his journal, the first symbols reminded him of something he'd seen in dream records from Babylonian tablets. Curved phonetic clusters that seemed to echo sound patterns rather than describe meaning. Within 2 weeks, he had stopped attending lectures. Within a month, he was dead. An apparent suicide. The phrase carved into his desk, with a fountain pen broken in half and jammed into the wood, was, "The words are not words. They are instructions." No translation was found. His notes were confiscated. The university denied ever commissioning the project. In 1955, a graduate student at the University of Milan named Antonella Vieri claimed to have accessed images of the scroll through an archival leak tied to the Vatican. She shared strange sketches and half-translated terms with fellow students, calling it a code to erase suffering. 4 days later, she was found wandering a rail yard barefoot, humming a sequence of tones on repeat. When asked who she was, she answered, "I haven't remembered yet." She died in a hospital bed 3 days later of what doctors called spontaneous cerebral bleeding. Her mother said she had no history of medical issues. Her research was quietly removed from university records. Then there's the case of Dr. Ilya Novak, a Russian military linguist assigned to a secret Cold War-era intelligence unit in the 1970s. His job was to analyze unknown scripts and symbols recovered from psychological warfare experiments. In a report later released in part through a Russian dissident forum, Novak refers to a living text, something he says changes meaning depending on who reads it. He believed the symbols had no fixed definitions, but operated like a mirror to the subconscious. What you feared it spoke. He died in 1976 during a sleep study in Moscow. Witnesses say he sat upright during REM's sleep, whispered a sentence in an unknown tongue, and collapsed. His autopsy revealed a total shutdown of the language processing centers of the brain. His final written note said, I think it heard me. As the deaths mounted, rumors spread. Conspiracy forums connected them to a classified branch of the Vatican tasked with neutralizing forbidden knowledge. Linguists speculated about a cognitive booby trap, a kind of mimetic hazard, where understanding a word becomes a lethal event. Some suggested that the scroll contained phonetic structures that hijack neurological systems, activating primal centers of fear, decay, and existential dread. Not unlike the black speech of myth, but real, codified, intentional. In the 1990s, during the rise of the early internet, a group of fringe academics launched Project ECO, a collaborative experiment to crowdsource unknown scripts, including high-res scans of Codex Tenebris fragments leaked from an Italian vault. Within weeks, participants began reporting intense migraines, memory lapses, and what some described as audio hallucinations. Tones, breathing, a voice beneath language. One participant, known by the username Kiel Sidyal, posted this before deleting his account. The text isn't being read, it's reading us. It's choosing who can hear it. Project Echo was shut down 6 days later. Multiple users disappeared. One, a young coder in Warsaw, was found catatonic, having clawed his own ears. He survived, but never spoke again. As of now, there are exactly 11 confirmed deaths tied to direct interaction with the scroll or its derivatives. But some researchers believe the number is far higher, possibly in the hundreds, hidden behind misdiagnosed aneurysms, accidents, and sudden disappearances. Even stranger, some cases show no physical trauma at all, just silence, as if the person simply turned off. And that brings us to one of the most recent incidents. In 2019, a London-based occult researcher named Marianne Shaw published a blog post titled, "The Language That Should Never Be Spoken." She claimed to have received a scan of a new fragment, one not seen before. Her analysis focused on a repeating symbol at the center of the spiral, a glyph she called the listener's eye. She believed this symbol represented not a word, but a presence, a force encoded into the language itself. She planned to post a full breakdown of her theory the following week. She never did. Her final post simply read, "It's awake." No further updates, no digital footprint. Her email, phone number, website, all deleted. To this day, no one has heard from her. So why does this language kill? Some say it's not the words. It's the structure, the rhythm, the way the symbols create resonance in the brain like a tuning fork in the dark. Others believe it was designed not by people, but by something older. Something that once needed language to reach us, and now only needs listeners. The scroll still exists, and the people still looking for it? They might already be on the list. It was never meant to be read. That is the conclusion many scholars have reached. Quietly, and with unease, when speaking of the language found in Codex Tenebris, those who dare to analyze its structure claim that it doesn't behave like any known system of writing. It doesn't explain, instruct, or describe. It reflects. It amplifies. It waits. And according to scattered fragments of ancient mythology, this is not the first time such a language has appeared. It has another name. They called it the mourner's tongue. To understand the term, we must look far older than 1904. Older than Rome, or Greece, or even Babylon. In the ruins of the Sumerian city of Eridu, considered one of the earliest human settlements, there are references to voices forbidden to echo. Etched onto clay tablets buried beneath a destroyed ziggurat are symbols that modern archaeologists have yet to fully decode. Some scholars dismissed them as nonsense, but others pointed out their disturbing similarity to the spiral formations seen in the Codex. Among those symbols is a repeated phrase that appears in the same location across 4 different fragments. It translates roughly to, "Let the words die with the speaker." That might sound poetic, but in ancient Sumerian death rites, the phrase served a very literal purpose. It was spoken over the dead not to honor them, but to contain them. According to an obscure Akkadian funerary text known as the Night Gate Scroll, certain individuals, priests, kings, warlords, were believed to carry such a powerful presence in life that they could not be allowed to speak after death. It wasn't metaphor. It wasn't myth. It was law. When these individuals died, a ritual was performed in which a series of symbols were carved into blackened clay and buried alongside the body. The language was not meant for others to read. It was meant for the dead to hear. A warning, a seal, a command not to return. Now jump forward to early Egypt. Hidden deep inside the walls of the unfinished pyramid of Neferkara, a pharaoh wiped from most official records, hieroglyphs were discovered in 1992 that resemble none used by any known dynasty. Circular, twisting, angular where they shouldn't be. Linguists who examined them said they seemed to simulate breath, not meaning, like capturing the sound of a last gasp. One inscription, translated loosely, reads, "This voice is bound. Let no ear know it." The pyramid had no burial chamber, no sarcophagus, just sealed corridors, and this single phrase, over and over, spiraling into the stone. The idea of the mourner's tongue emerges across cultures. In isolated Himalayan villages, there are stories of death songs sung only by mute monks, passed down through vibration rather than sound. In Amazonian shamanic lore, there are forbidden chants used to seal a soul in place during death ceremonies. And in medieval Ireland, there's the tale of a manuscript burned by its own author after claiming that reading it aloud caused his wife to vanish mid-sentence. Each time, the pattern is the same: a language that does not teach or share, but silences. Some have come to believe that the mourner's tongue is not a human creation, but a tool designed to control something we don't understand. When Vatican scholar Cesare Bellini referred to the scroll in his notes, he never used the term language. Instead, he used the Latin word sigillum, seal. He wrote, "This is not speech. It is a lock, and it must remain shut." That aligns with what Dr. Ilya Novak later theorized in the 1970s, that the Codex functions like a psychic containment field, and that any attempt to read or translate it breaks a layer of that field. Each reader, each viewer, each decoder becomes a crack. In 2015, an independent researcher named Daniel Wren published a short book titled Echoes of the Sealed Voice. It was quickly pulled from digital storefronts due to complaints of seizures and severe migraines from readers. Only a few excerpts survive. One of them reads, "The tongue mourns not the dead, but the living it must bury next." Wren disappeared 6 weeks after publication. His last email to a colleague included an audio file with the subject line, "They're still speaking." No one has been able to decode the file without incident. Why does this matter now? Because fragments of this language, these symbols, have begun to appear more frequently on anonymous forums, embedded in digital artwork, in dark web archives passed around like cursed artifacts. And each time a new piece is found, someone tries to read it. Some believe we're not dealing with a language at all, but a self-replicating entity, spreading through comprehension, an infection that doesn't need a body, just a reader, a listener, a translator. What began as a whisper to the dead may now be speaking to the living. And some are listening back. What if the Codex was not buried to protect us from the dead, but to protect something else from waking? Next, we'll look at what happened when someone tried to record the sound of the language. What they captured should never have been heard. For years, the scroll was treated as a visual phenomenon, a dangerous text that destroyed through symbols, through meaning. But in 1952, the Vatican attempted something different. They tried to speak it. That experiment was called Operazione Voce Nera, Operation Black Voice. It was a project so secret, even the Pope at the time was reportedly kept on the outside. What happened in those underground chambers beneath the archival sanctum would remain hidden for decades, until someone leaked the recordings. The only surviving document referencing the project comes from a declassified section of the Vatican's internal memo system, dated August 17, 1952. It reads, "Following recent developments in cognitive linguistic breakdown patterns observed in direct contact with the scroll, it has been deemed necessary to determine whether the text's lethal properties persist when phonetically vocalized." What that means, in simple terms, they wanted to know if speaking the language was as dangerous as reading it. If the results are to be believed, the answer was worse. 3 linguists were chosen, all highly educated, fluent in dead languages, and trained in theological containment procedures. Their names were not recorded in the released material. Instead, they were referred to as Subject A, Subject B, Subject C. Each one was shown a single phrase from the Codex, just 5 symbols. No full sentences, no context. Their task, to transcribe the symbols into approximated Latin phonetics and then read them aloud. The sessions were held in a sealed room with soundproofing, monitored by a team of archivists and 1 priest. The first subject read the phrase. Nothing happened. For 11 seconds, the room was still. On the 12th second, the subject's pupils dilated. He whispered something, unintelligible, and collapsed. His pulse stopped. Blood pooled beneath his tongue. The audio log cuts out. The Vatican recorded the death as sudden cardiac event. But the attending priest wrote a single note in the margin of the report. It wasn't the sound. It was the silence that followed. Subject B went next. This time, they made the subject wear noise-canceling headphones, attempting to isolate their brain from the sound of their own voice. They read the same 5-symbol phrase. No reaction. 5 minutes passed. The subject smiled, stood, and requested to continue with the next sequence. He was escorted back to his chamber. 3 hours later, he was found dead in his quarters. He had written the phrase on the wall 672 times using his own blood. Each instance was inverted, reversed, as though the phrase had begun writing itself through him, backwards. Subject C never made it to the vocal test. Before the experiment began, he asked to see a full sentence. The researcher complied. C turned pale. He whispered something under his breath. Then he did something no one expected. He spoke the phrase out loud, not a test phrase, but a full sequence of 17 glyphs. The audio equipment malfunctioned. Observers reported feeling intense pressure in their ears. 1 began bleeding from the nose. 2 fainted. The lights flickered. 1 archivist went blind in her left eye for 8 minutes. C was gone, not dead, not unconscious. Gone. When the guards opened the door, the room was empty. Only his shoes remained, neatly placed where he'd been standing. The Vatican labeled the incident as a spiritual anomaly and sealed the chamber indefinitely. The original scroll fragment used in the tests was destroyed, according to official reports. But years later, in 1984, a black market collector uploaded a file to a hidden BBS forum titled Vatican Recordings Sample2.wave. It was a short audio clip, 7 seconds. A voice, low, calm, non-human, speaking syllables that do not match any known language. Listeners describe it as metallic, hollow, and wrongly timed, as though recorded in a space where time is fractured. Some who listened experienced dizziness. A few reported hallucinations. One listener posted, "I felt something behind me. When I turned around, it was gone, but the reflection in my screen didn't match me." The file was removed within 48 hours. Could the voice be real? Or was it a hoax, inspired by the legend of Codex Tenebris? That's the question no one can answer. But a pattern emerges. The scroll's symbols seem to contain embedded phonetic suggestions, meaning they aren't just visual. They're meant to be read aloud, spoken, heard. And if that's true, then the danger isn't just in seeing the language. It's in letting it out. One researcher, working under the pseudonym Marrowglass, theorized that the Codex functions like a verbal contagion, a kind of virus that moves through interpretation. Every reader is a carrier. Every speaker becomes an amplifier. His final blog post simply read, "We're all microphones now." Since then, more audio samples have been rumored to exist. Snippets posted in Discord groups, obscure podcasts using distorted voices, even ambient YouTube videos hiding phonetic patterns in their background hum. No one knows if these are fragments of the language or just mimicry. But the fear is growing. If the Codex was ever truly recorded, and if that recording survived, then one day someone will play it loud enough, and we won't have time to cover our ears. Next, we'll explore the first time the language reached the internet, and how a video that almost no one saw still managed to leave behind a trail of silence. In February 2025, a YouTube channel with fewer than 300 subscribers uploaded a video titled Translating the Unreadable, the Lost Scroll of the Mourner's Tongue. It was 3 minutes and 47 seconds long. Black background, white text, a voice speaking calmly in Latin. Under 200 people viewed it before it was removed. Of those viewers, at least 6 were later confirmed dead. 3 were hospitalized for seizures. One, a linguistics student from Belgium, was found comatose in her dorm, with a spiral drawn on her wall using black ink and her own hair. The uploader's name was Ghost Format, and that video marked the beginning of what many now call the digital echo, the moment the language of the Codex made its first quiet leap into the internet. No one knows exactly where Ghost Format got the source material. Some say he worked for a museum digitization lab. Others believe he was part of an underground group that had access to Vatican microfilm archives. One anonymous post from an archived /x/board claimed Ghost Format was only a courier, someone instructed to upload a file he didn't even understand. Whatever the truth, the video lasted online for less than 48 hours. And yet, it spread. Copies appeared on dark web forums under different names. Voice of the Black Gate. Codex Test 17. Do not translate. Each one was slightly different. Some distorted, others reversed. But all contained the same visual core, a phrase rendered in spiraling symbols, slowly rotating, glowing red at the edges. Many who watched it described a strange sensation, a metallic taste, a pressure at the base of the skull, a sound that felt like breathing, but not theirs. YouTube deleted the video for violations of community guidelines, but provided no further explanation. A Reddit thread dedicated to decoding the video reached over 14,000 upvotes before it was suddenly locked and removed. The top comment before deletion read, "It doesn't want to be understood, but it wants to be heard." And then came the knock-on effects. Small things at first. Voice assistants randomly activating in the middle of the night. White noise machines emitting brief bursts of reversed audio. Auto-generated captions on unrelated videos spelling out fragments of the Codex's phrase structure, without the uploader ever including them. People began to report dreams, shared ones. Strangers from opposite ends of the world describing the same image. A hallway of red stone. A figure kneeling, mouth open, but no sound. And a phrase they couldn't remember upon waking, only that it felt final. The digital echo wasn't just a file, it was a pattern. And once introduced into the internet, the pattern began to replicate. One coder traced the data footprint of Ghost Format's video and discovered something chilling. The waveform of the spoken section, when plotted visually, resembled the same symbol structure found in the Codex itself. The sound was the shape. The shape was the sound. It's difficult to explain what that means to someone who hasn't studied deep linguistic phenomena. But in simple terms, the Codex may have never needed readers, only listeners. Once digitized, the language became code, and once in code, it could travel anywhere, not just in speech, but in rhythm, in color, in compression. Some now believe that fragments of the Codex hide inside image files, video glitches, even corrupted audio on old DVDs. A whisper embedded in noise. A voice buried in metadata. In April 2025, a Twitch streamer named Jenna Armin played a fan-submitted weird sound test live on stream. The clip was just 5 seconds of static, followed by a deep, rhythmic pulse. Jenna paused, rubbed her temples, laughed it off. 3 days later, she deleted every video on her channel. She hasn't posted since. But one viewer who screen recorded the clip noticed something odd. At the exact moment the pulse plays, Jenna's eyes shift to the upper corner of the screen, and she mouths something. Slowed down, it matches a known Codex phrase from the Vatican archives. A phrase Bellini once labeled, "The invitation." Why does this matter? Because the Codex was never meant to be digital. It was sealed for a reason. The symbols weren't just dangerous because of what they said. They were dangerous because of how they interacted with human perception. By converting them into pixels, compression, and data, we gave the Codex new ways to speak. And it's still speaking. There are rumors that parts of the Codex now exist inside YouTube's own subtitle algorithm. That if a video includes certain combinations of words and images, the algorithm will generate Codex-like captions without input from the uploader. A form of unconscious translation. A sleeping machine interpreting a waking language. So the question isn't whether the Codex has infected the internet. It's whether the internet itself is now part of the Codex. Because somewhere, buried in a forgotten forum, or hidden in the auto-suggest of a voice assistant, a phrase is waiting to be spoken again. And when it is, someone will hear it, and someone will understand. Next, we'll look at the moment that understanding begins. The phrase that changes people. The ones who didn't die, but didn't stay the same. In early 2025, a small YouTube channel uploaded a video titled, "Translating the Unreadable, the Lost Scroll of the Mourner's Tongue." It was under 4 minutes long. No fancy visuals, Just a black background, white text, and a calm voice speaking in Latin. The video didn't go viral. In fact, fewer than 200 people saw it before it was taken down. But something about it felt off. Viewers described unusual reactions, a sense of unease, lightheadedness, even mild confusion after watching. One person said it felt like they had heard a voice whispering just before the video ended. The uploader used the name Ghost Format, and soon after that video, the account vanished. The incident quickly gained attention on obscure internet forums. Was it an art project, a hoax, or something else? Some began calling it the digital echo, the moment a mysterious language that had been hidden for centuries made its way online. What made it strange wasn't just the content. It was the format. The voice sounded real, but didn't match any known speaker. The background noise was too clean. The text on screen moved slowly in spirals. Some said the letters didn't just form words, they formed patterns. One viewer claimed that when they paused the video at a certain moment, the text briefly formed a shape, something like an eye. The video was eventually removed for violating YouTube's terms. But copies started circulating on other platforms. Each version looked slightly different, distorted, cropped, slowed down. But they all shared the same core: an unfamiliar sequence of sounds, and a symbol at the center of the screen that rotated gently. Online communities began to experiment. Some tried reversing the audio. Others transcribed the sounds and attempted translations. One Reddit user wrote, "It doesn't say anything in the way we expect. It's more like it's waiting for us to say something back." The comment was later deleted. That's when strange tech glitches began to show up in unrelated places. Auto-generated captions on random videos would occasionally form unusual sequences, words that didn't fit the dialogue. Voice assistants would activate unexpectedly and stay on longer than they should. A few users reported dreams that seemed shared. Dreams of a red hallway, of something waiting at the end. They couldn't remember what it said, but they woke up with the feeling that it had spoken, and they had understood. The most fascinating part is that no one can fully explain why this video caused such a reaction. The content was minimal. There were no jump scares, no flashing lights, just symbols, sound, silence. And yet, those who watched it often described the same sensations: a feeling of being observed, a strange quietness after the video ended, a sense that the words weren't just being read, they were being heard in a different way. Some experts believe that the symbols shown may have contained specific visual patterns that subtly affected how the viewer processed language. Others suggested that the sound frequencies used might have triggered mild psychological effects, similar to ASMR, but less understood. Still, no one has been able to recreate the full effect or explain why so many people had the same experience. One audio technician who archived a copy of the clip said the waveform of the voice was unusual. When plotted visually, it resembled a spiral, like the one seen in ancient scroll designs. He called it a message wrapped inside the shape of sound. And that might be the key, because some now believe the Codex was never about language in the traditional sense. It wasn't about grammar or meaning or translation. It was about resonance. The way a phrase feels when you hear it. The way certain shapes make you feel when you see them. Not logic, instinct. Since then, new accounts have uploaded similar experiments. Videos with encoded messages, layered whispers, and slow spiraling symbols. Some are clearly fakes, but others feel too close, like echoes of something still trying to be heard, something patient, something learning. Next time, we'll explore what happens to those who don't just hear the message, but understand it, and why not everyone who listens vanishes. Some change. Some people read the Codex and feel nothing. Others say they feel something shift, quietly, almost like a whisper behind the mind. And then there are those who remember more than they should, not because they learned something new, but because they heard something that felt like it was already inside them. In 2021, an anonymous research group calling themselves the Spiral Choir began collecting stories from people who had been exposed to pieces of the Codex. Some had found it online, others claimed it appeared in dreams, in artwork, or even in sound. They were all very different people, different lives, different stories, but something connected them. They had all heard a phrase they couldn't explain, not in a normal language, not even in words, just a feeling, a message they couldn't unhear. The group was started by Avery Khoury, a linguist who once taught at a university before quietly stepping away from public work. She became fascinated by how symbols influence perception. In one of her last interviews, she said, "It's not just about what a symbol means. It's about what it does to the person who sees it." Avery described a phrase she encountered in a dream, a phrase she couldn't remember exactly, but that she said made her see everything differently afterward. It wasn't frightening, just impossible to ignore. She called it a message that speaks directly to the part of you that doesn't use words. Others reported similar things. One man said he began hearing patterns in everyday sound, like conversations had a rhythm, and that rhythm carried something beneath the words. Another person described suddenly remembering places they'd never visited. Not as fantasy, but as if they'd simply forgotten something real. These weren't dramatic changes. They were subtle, slow, like something gently tapping at the edge of awareness. Over time, many of these individuals began writing strange shapes during moments of rest, unconscious patterns, spirals, marks that didn't belong to any known language. It wasn't automatic writing, and it wasn't art. It was something between both, a quiet continuation of something they couldn't explain. Researchers who examined these cases proposed that the Codex might not be a traditional language at all. Instead, it could be a kind of pattern, a system designed to interact with the human mind in a way we're not used to. Something that resonates not through meaning, but through structure, not through logic, but through presence. Khoury wrote in her final journal, "It doesn't teach you anything new. It just points out the things you've always known but never had words for." That's why so many people who encounter the Codex say the same thing. It feels familiar, like remembering a song without knowing where you heard it. Some AI researchers ran parts of the Codex through deep learning models. The results were strange, but not harmful. One model generated symmetrical glyphs even when fed random data. Another one stopped responding to typical prompts and began outputting mirrored phrases that didn't match anything in its training data. It didn't crash, it just changed its behavior. When asked why, one engineer said, "I think the system tried to understand it. But maybe it didn't need to. Maybe it just felt the shape of it." In one well-documented case, a voice actor hired to read an old set of symbols for a fictional podcast said the recording session felt different from usual. The room went quiet. The microphone picked up extra layers of sound that weren't part of the input. And when the editor reviewed the waveform, it showed unusual symmetry. Not noise, not interference, just something too organized to be random. He still has the file. In a post, he wrote, "I don't know what it is, but sometimes I think it's still waiting for me to finish reading it." This is the strange truth about the Codex. It doesn't force itself into your mind. It invites you to listen. And if you do, it doesn't scream. It hums, not loudly, not even in words. Just a presence that changes how you think about language and about silence. Next, we'll explore the final stage, when someone no longer reads the Codex, but becomes part of it. When the message doesn't come from the page or the voice, but from inside. There's a point where the Codex stops being something you read and starts being something you carry. The last stage, the one few people talk about, not because it's secret, but because the people who reach it don't explain what happened. They just change. Researchers once believed the Codex was dangerous because of what it said. Later, they thought it was because of how it was structured, its symbols, rhythms, patterns. But maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe the Codex doesn't speak to your mind. Maybe it speaks to your attention, to the part of you that listens, even when there's nothing to hear. In 2024, a file began circulating quietly on encrypted forums. A 7-minute audio clip titled, "The Listener." There was no description, no voice, no melody. Just low tones and faint pulses, like distant breathing through a wall. People described it as boring at first, until they reached the 5-minute mark. That's when something changed. Some said the air in the room felt different. Others said they suddenly remembered the exact shape of a dream they had years ago. But the most common reaction? Silence. Not fear, not excitement, just the feeling that something was now listening to them. A sound engineer who analyzed the file noticed that the waveform, when slowed down and layered against itself, revealed a moving pattern, one that looked familiar. It matched a spiral found in an early Codex sketch, almost perfectly. He said the audio didn't contain words, it contained a structure, a way of listening. The theory emerged that the Codex is not really a language, or a curse, or even a message. It's a mirror. And the people who spend too long with it eventually stop hearing it as something outside of themselves. They become part of it. They become listeners. So what is a listener? They aren't followers or believers. They don't repeat the Codex out loud. They just begin to respond to things others can't hear. They pause during conversations, as if someone else is speaking to them. They stop reacting to music, but can spend hours listening to static, rain, or breath. One man, previously a sound technician, said he no longer listens to music because there's already something playing behind everything else. A listener might still seem normal. They eat, they sleep, they go to work. But if you spend time with them, you'll notice little things. They avoid mirrors. They react to specific tones. And sometimes, they say your name in a way that feels like they aren't using it as a label, but as an address. As if calling something forward. Why does this happen? The current theory is this. The Codex is not a message we discovered. It's a process we were always meant to complete. Something ancient, something quiet, a method of listening that rewires attention, not with violence, not with fear, but with stillness. So still that eventually, what listens through you is not just you. That's why most listeners don't talk about what they heard. Because the Codex doesn't demand action. It doesn't require belief. It just waits for you to recognize that it's already speaking through the spaces between your thoughts. And once you do, you don't need the scroll anymore. You don't need the symbols. because you understand that it was never about understanding. It was about receiving. There are stories, quiet ones, about people who disappear, not physically, but emotionally, who stop reacting to the world around them, who stop expressing surprise or joy or fear. Not because they've been taken, but because they're already listening to something else, something older, something underneath. And when they speak, it's slow, careful, almost as if they're repeating something they just heard whispered inside their own mind. Maybe the Codex isn't dangerous at all. Maybe it was a gift that was never meant to be found too soon. A reminder that language didn't begin with us, and it might not end with us either. So if you hear it, that rhythm in the static, that name said softly when no one's around, that idea that arrives in perfect silence, don't answer it. Don't repeat it. Because the Codex doesn't want you to understand. It wants you to receive. And once you do, you're not alone in there anymore.